Everyone at the gala seemed to glide effortlessly through the chandelier's warm light, laughing, chatting, and raising glasses as if life had no shadows. But in the midst of the grandeur, one girl stood apart. Clara, the billionaire's only daughter, barely 15, had a quiet grace about her, and yet the room treated her like she didn't exist. She had been born deaf, and though her world was full of color and light, the sounds that others took for granted were foreign to her. She wore a pale pink dress that swirled around her knees, and her large eyes scanned the room with a mixture of hope and hesitation. Her father, Charles Whitmore, the tech magnate whose wealth could fill a small country, was too busy entertaining investors and celebrities to notice her. The assistants and hosts hovered nearby, perfectly polished, ensuring that no uncomfortable incidents occurred, but their idea of care was keeping her out of sight, out of mind. Clara tried to smile at a few people she knew, a nod here, a wave there, but their responses were mechanical, distracted, and distant. She felt invisible in the very world built to celebrate her family. People whispered politely about the girl who couldn't hear, pretending their actions weren't dismissive, but Clara, sharp as she was, felt every tiny slight. Her fingers itched to communicate, to reach out, but there was no one who could meet her halfway. The room buzzed with energy, laughter, music, and chatter, all of it just out of her reach. Clara's mother had passed away when she was little, leaving her father swamped in grief and ambition. He loved her, of course, but his understanding was limited, filtered through the world he dominated. And tonight, surrounded by glittering strangers who hardly acknowledged her presence, Clara felt the sharp ache of isolation. That was when she noticed her. Amara. A new assistant, tall and kind, with a presence that seemed to command calm without demanding attention. She had been hired recently, recommended for her experience working with children, and she moved through the crowd with a steady grace, noticing things others overlooked. When Amara caught sight of Clara, her heart tightened. She had seen that look before, the look of someone who was physically present but emotionally absent from the world around them. She approached Clara cautiously, bending slightly to meet her gaze. Clara's eyes widened slightly at the recognition, as if some unspoken understanding had already formed. Amara held out her hand, and for a moment Clara hesitated, uncertain. But then she reached out and let Amara guide her gently to a quiet corner of the hall, away from the chatter, the noise, the clinking glasses. Here, the lights softened, and for the first time that evening, Clara felt seen. Amara smiled, and without a word, began using sign language. Her fingers moved fluidly, creating shapes and motions that Clara understood instantly. It was a conversation that needed no voice. Amara asked her name, her interests, and slowly, Clara began to relax, her hands moving in response, telling stories of the small, quiet world she inhabited when the rest of the world ignored her. Amara listened intently, nodding, smiling, making Clara feel like a person who mattered. Time seemed to slow as Clara laughed silently, a pure soundless joy that lifted her shoulders and brightened her eyes. The world outside that corner continued its endless whirl, but for these two, it had narrowed into something intimate, something magical. Amara asked about school, about friends, and Clara's heart lifted with each gesture. She had always wanted someone to truly understand her, and here, finally, was a person who did. But even as the conversation flowed, the undercurrent of sadness remained. Clara had been invisible her entire life in social settings like this, and one evening of attention could not erase years of neglect. She glanced back toward her father, hoping for a sign of acknowledgement, but he was laughing with a group of executives, oblivious to her presence. A pang of longing twisted inside her. Amara noticed and gently touched Clara's arm, her sign for, "You are important." Clara's fingers trembled as she signed back, "I wish others could see me like you do." Amara's expression softened. She knew that this night was just the beginning, that change would take courage and strategy. And she was ready to be the person who made it happen. As the evening wore on, they continued to converse silently, sharing stories, thoughts, and small jokes. Clara's loneliness began to lift, replaced by the warmth of connection. But in the back of her mind, a shadow loomed. Her father's world was harsh and busy, and Amara's role was fragile. One misstep, one misunderstanding, could undo the fragile trust that had begun to form. Still, Clara felt a spark of hope, the first she had felt in years. Maybe tonight could be different. Maybe she could finally be seen. And as the final guests began to leave and the chandeliers dimmed, Clara realized she had experienced something she never thought possible. Someone who truly heard her, even without sound, someone who acknowledged her existence and made her feel like she mattered. In that silent corner of the gala, Clara smiled genuinely for the first time in a long time, unaware that this encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only her life but the lives of everyone around her, revealing the depths of her father's love, the shadows of his neglect, and the extraordinary courage that could arise from being truly understood. And Amara, for her part, vowed silently that she would do everything in her power to ensure that Clara's voice, though unspoken, would echo far beyond this quiet corner, shaking the walls of indifference that had surrounded her for too long. The next morning, Clara woke up with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Last night's encounter with Amara lingered in her mind like a warm, comforting whisper, the first genuine connection she had felt in years. She dressed carefully in her pale blue school uniform, her hands brushing over the neatly pressed fabric as if this small act could prepare her for the world that always seemed to ignore her. The breakfast hall of the Whitmore estate was bright and bustling, but Clara entered with caution, aware that here, unlike in the private corner of the gala, she would again face indifference. True enough, the staff barely glanced at her, and her father, preoccupied with his emails and stock reports on the giant tablet at the end of the table, didn't notice her presence at all. The house was enormous, echoing with sound she couldn't hear, and Clara often felt swallowed by the cavernous halls. Yet the memory of Amara's warm eyes gave her courage. During breakfast, Amara appeared silently at the doorway, carrying a tray of fruit and tea. She caught Clara's gaze, smiled, and signed a quick, "Follow me." Clara's heart leapt. She obeyed without hesitation, weaving through the marble hallways until they reached a quiet study room tucked behind the library. This became their secret sanctuary. Here, Amara began the lessons that would change Clara's life. She taught Clara to refine her sign language, expanding her vocabulary, her ability to express complex thoughts, her capacity to narrate stories in the silent language that could bridge worlds. Amara was patient, gentle, and encouraging, correcting a finger placement or motion with a soft, understanding gesture, never frustration. Clara found herself laughing silently, reveling in this new way to communicate. The hours flew by as they shared stories, jokes, and dreams. Amara even brought in books written in both standard English and sign notation, allowing Clara to explore literature in a way she had never experienced. The connection between them deepened. But outside the study, the world remained indifferent. At school, Clara's classmates barely acknowledged her, whispering behind her back, curious yet hesitant, unsure how to interact. Teachers spoke to her as if she were fragile, capable of only the most basic comprehension. Each day was a reminder of how isolating life could be when the world refused to meet you halfway. And yet, Clara clung to the secret lessons with Amara. Each afternoon became a respite, a place where she could fully exist without judgment. One rainy day, while the wind rattled the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, Clara found the courage to share a small personal story with Amara through sign. She spoke of her mother, a gentle woman who had passed when Clara was very young, leaving behind only memories and a few treasured letters. Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she signed the story, her hands moving faster, more urgently, conveying not just words but emotions. Amara signed back in kind, her gestures gentle and filled with empathy, showing Clara that she was not alone in her grief. That day, Clara realized that this was not just learning a language, it was learning to be heard in a world that constantly silenced her. Amara suggested they begin practicing communication outside the confines of the study. "We need to show people what they're missing," she signed, her fingers sharp and confident. Clara felt a thrill of daring excitement. Could she step into the world and command attention in a way she never had before? The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Their first attempt was at a family brunch, a small gathering of relatives who barely remembered her existence. Clara sat quietly at first, her hands folded in her lap, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility. But then, encouraged by Amara's supportive gestures, she began signing small phrases to her cousins. At first, their reactions were awkward, confused expressions, hesitant smiles, but as Clara's confidence grew, so did their curiosity. One cousin, a girl named Lila, leaned in and attempted to copy Clara's signs. Laughter erupted silently between them, bridging the gap that had always existed. For the first time, Clara realized that people could change if only given the chance to understand. But it was not an easy path. Her father, busy with his empire, barely noticed the progress, still treating her as a background figure in his life. Yet Amara refused to give up. She whispered through gestures that change could come slowly, but it was inevitable if Clara remained steadfast. Days turned into weeks, and the lessons became more adventurous. Amara suggested that Clara start communicating with staff and peers in short bursts of sign language, gradually expanding her presence. It was a delicate balance: too much, and the world might resist; too little, and the world would remain indifferent. Clara's courage blossomed as she began to sign her thoughts at the dinner table, at small gatherings, and even during car rides with her father. People started noticing her in ways they never had before. But with recognition came envy, judgment, and subtle resistance. Some staff members whispered, some peers snickered, and Clara felt the weight of attention she had never experienced. Yet Amara remained her anchor, signing encouragement and reminding her that being different was a strength, not a weakness. Then one afternoon, while Clara was signing a story about a day at the park to her tutor, a sudden opportunity arose. Her father called for a meeting with important investors, and in a rare moment, he asked Clara to accompany him. It was her chance to step into a public space, to show her father and everyone else that she was capable of more than they had assumed. Amara's eyes sparkled with excitement. She signed quickly, "I will be right here if you need me." Clara nodded, her fingers trembling slightly but resolutely. As they entered the room, Clara felt every eye on her, some curious, some skeptical. She took a deep breath, recalling Amara's lessons, and began to sign her observations, her insights, and her ideas during the discussion. To her surprise, her father turned to her, first with mild curiosity, then genuine admiration. Investors leaned closer, intrigued by the clarity and thoughtfulness of her gestures. Clara's world, silent as it had always been, suddenly seemed full of potential. Yet even as pride swelled in her chest, a new challenge loomed. The world would not accept change easily, and Clara sensed that the next steps, revealing her voice, her presence, her abilities more fully, would require courage beyond what she had ever imagined. She glanced at Amara, who gave her a subtle nod, a silent message of unwavering support. Together, they were ready to face whatever resistance lay ahead. And in that moment, Clara realized something extraordinary. For the first time, she felt like she could truly belong, like the walls of silence that had confined her were beginning to crumble, and the world might finally hear her. It had been several months since Clara first discovered the warmth and understanding in Amara's presence, and she had grown remarkably confident in her ability to communicate through sign language. Yet despite her personal victories, the outside world remained largely indifferent or even hostile. School administrators still treated her as fragile, classmates gossiped behind her back, and even distant relatives who attended family functions continued to ignore her existence. Clara felt the frustration keenly, but she had learned from Amara that change was slow, and the first step was always showing the world she could no longer be overlooked. One crisp autumn afternoon, Charles Whitmore, her father, received an invitation to a charity gala meant to raise millions for underprivileged children. Typically, Clara would have been left behind, but Amara encouraged her to attend, insisting that it was an opportunity to make her presence known. Clara hesitated at first. She knew her father would be more concerned with networking than with her, and she feared the same dismissive treatment she had endured countless times before. But a glance at Amara, steady and reassuring, gave her courage. She dressed carefully, a soft lavender gown that flowed gracefully as she moved, and allowed her hair to be pinned in a way that framed her delicate face. For once, she felt ready to meet the world on her own terms. The moment they entered the ballroom, Clara noticed the curious glances and polite whispers that had become familiar. Yet this time, she refused to shrink away. Instead, she let her hands move confidently, signing greetings and small introductions to the attendees she could reach. Some stared in bewilderment, unsure how to respond. Others, intrigued, tried to mimic her gestures. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Where people had previously ignored her, they now hesitated to overlook her entirely. Then came the critical moment. The gala organizers asked Clara's father to speak about the family's philanthropic vision. As Charles approached the podium, Clara realized the perfect opportunity had arrived. She signed to Amara, asking if she could share a brief story about the challenges faced by deaf children in society. Amara's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded emphatically, giving Clara the green light. Taking a deep breath, Clara moved to a small stage beside the podium. The chatter of the room dimmed as guests noticed her presence. She began signing with fluid, precise motions, narrating her own experiences, the frustration of being ignored, the loneliness of social gatherings, and the small victories she had found through learning to communicate with Amara. Her hands told a story of isolation, courage, and hope. For those who could not see sign language, Amara stood beside her, translating her every motion into spoken words with clarity and emotion. The room grew silent, captivated by the authenticity and vulnerability of Clara's story. Some guests wiped away tears, moved by the bravery of a girl who had been invisible for so long. Charles, usually distracted by business matters, watched his daughter with wide eyes and an unfamiliar lump forming in his throat. He had always loved her, but he had never truly seen the depth of her intelligence, the strength of her spirit, or the pain she had endured in silence. As Clara finished, the audience erupted into applause. Clara's heart swelled, a combination of relief, pride, and newfound empowerment. For the first time, she had been seen, heard, and validated on a grand scale. But the applause also brought new challenges. Some wealthy donors, impressed yet slightly unsettled, whispered about whether Charles's daughter was capable of such confidence. A few old acquaintances murmured skepticism, questioning whether her accomplishments were the result of Amara's guidance rather than her own ability. Clara, sensing the undercurrent of doubt, refused to let it diminish her triumph. She had found her voice, silent as it was, and no amount of skepticism could erase the months of hard work and courage she had poured into mastering communication. Later that evening, as the gala began to wind down, Clara noticed a young girl hiding behind a curtain. Her fingers trembled as she signed, clearly hesitant, clearly afraid to reach out. Clara recognized herself in that small, frightened figure. She approached the girl and began signing slowly, gently, introducing herself and asking the girl's name. The girl's eyes widened in awe, and a shy smile spread across her face as she responded. At that moment, Clara realized that her journey had become larger than herself. She was no longer just seeking recognition, she was becoming a bridge for others who had been silenced, showing them that their stories mattered and that they could be heard. But not all challenges were so simple. After the gala, Clara returned home to find her father waiting in his study, his expression unreadable. Charles had finally grasped the depth of her abilities, but he also worried about the scrutiny and attention she had drawn. "Clara," he said carefully, signing in the manner Amara had taught him, "I did not realize how much you have endured. I am proud of you, but the world may not always be kind." Clara felt a mix of gratitude and frustration. She wanted to shout, to tell him that she didn't need protection, that she needed understanding, but she simply signed back, "I am ready. I am strong. I can face them." Her confidence surprised even him. Over the following weeks, Clara continued to assert herself in increasingly public ways. She led small projects, attended events, and engaged with peers and staff using sign language. Amara remained her steadfast guide, offering silent encouragement and strategic advice. The bond between them deepened into something unbreakable, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared determination. Yet, with visibility came scrutiny. Some relatives criticized Charles for allowing his daughter such independence. Some investors questioned whether a deaf child could understand the complexities of the world she was entering. Clara faced these judgments with dignity, using her skills to educate, to demonstrate competence, and to defy expectations. Each challenge strengthened her resolve, making her more determined to break the barriers that had kept her silent for so long. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting in which a skeptical board member questioned her contributions, Clara and Amara sat in the study, hands intertwined in sign language as they processed the day. "Do you ever feel afraid?" Amara signed. Clara paused, fingers trembling slightly before responding, "Yes. But fear is not the same as weakness. I will not let them silence me." Amara nodded, pride shining in her eyes. The stage was now set for something even greater. Clara's voice would not only be heard, it would echo, challenging assumptions, transforming perceptions, and empowering others. The quiet girl who had once been invisible had become a force that could no longer be ignored, and the world around her was beginning to take notice. The spring air carried a sense of anticipation as Clara prepared for the most important event of her young life, a national conference on accessibility and inclusion. It was an invitation her father had received after the story of Clara's bravery and eloquence at the charity gala had gone viral in certain social circles. The conference promised a room filled with educators, policymakers, philanthropists, and other influential figures. Clara knew this was her chance not just to be seen, but to make a real difference. The night before the event, she sat in the study with Amara, their hands moving fluidly in sign language as they reviewed her presentation. Clara's fingers traced each word carefully, the narrative a blend of personal experience, advocacy, and inspiration for others who had been marginalized. "Do you think I'm ready?" Clara signed, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. Amara's response was steady, confident, and reassuring, "You have been ready all along. Now the world will see it too." The morning arrived with a golden sunrise that seemed almost symbolic, bathing the Whitmore estate in a warm light. Clara dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, her hair pulled back to reveal her expressive eyes. As she stepped into the waiting limousine, she felt a surge of determination. Today, she would not simply attend, she would lead, she would teach, she would inspire. Upon arriving at the conference, Clara was met with polite curiosity. Some attendees whispered among themselves, clearly unsure what to expect from the teenage daughter of a billionaire. But Clara had learned that the eyes of the skeptics were less important than the hearts of those she could reach. As she took the stage, her hands rose with confidence, and Amara began translating her signs into spoken words for the audience. Clara recounted her experiences growing up deaf in a world that often ignored her, her fingers moving with precision and emotion, her gestures painting a vivid picture of loneliness, courage, and hope. The audience listened intently, captivated by her authenticity. Clara signed stories of the first time someone truly noticed her, the small victories that had become monumental milestones, and the transformative power of genuine understanding. She spoke of the bonds she had formed with Amara, who had not only taught her language but also had shown her the courage to claim her place in the world. By the time she shared her vision for a society where differences were celebrated rather than hidden, the room was electrified. Applause erupted, some standing, some wiping away tears. Clara felt a warmth she had never known, a sense that her voice, though silent, had traveled beyond herself and touched the hearts of others. Charles, sitting in the front row, was overcome. Pride, awe, and a deep sense of regret mingled as he realized how often he had overlooked the depth of his daughter's abilities. For the first time, he saw Clara not as a child to protect, but as a young leader who could inspire and educate. But Clara was not done. She noticed a group of young children in the audience, some shy, some curious, who were also deaf or differently abled. With a mischievous spark in her eyes, she beckoned them forward, signing encouragement and inviting them to share a few words, their own experiences, and their hopes for the future. Hesitant at first, the children soon found their confidence, and the audience watched as young voices, amplified through sign language and translation, filled the room with courage and determination. The moment was electric. Clara realized then that her journey was no longer just personal, it was communal, a movement that could empower countless others who had been silenced. And yet, there was one final surprise awaiting her. As the event concluded, a renowned philanthropist approached Clara and Amara, holding out a contract and a beaming smile. "We want to establish a foundation in your name," he said, "to support deaf children and teach sign language across schools nationwide. Your story has inspired us all." Clara's eyes widened, her hands flying as she signed her excitement and gratitude. Amara translated with equal enthusiasm, and the room erupted in applause once more. Tears streamed down Clara's face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of being truly recognized, of knowing that her courage had sparked tangible change. Charles stepped forward, embracing her tightly. His sign language had improved since the gala, but even without perfect words, the depth of his love was unmistakable. Clara felt the weight of years of silence lift, replaced by the promise of a future where she could be herself unapologetically. That evening, back at the Whitmore estate, Clara and Amara sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered stars. "You did it," Amara signed, her hands gentle but firm. Clara smiled, signing back, "We did it. Together." For Clara, the journey had begun in a quiet corner of a grand hall, with a single person who saw her worth. It had carried her through isolation, self-discovery, and courage, and had culminated in a moment that would change countless lives. She had learned that being deaf was not a limitation, that her voice, silent or spoken, could resonate farther than she had ever imagined. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew that this was only the beginning. The world had finally listened, and Clara was ready to lead it toward a future filled with understanding, compassion, and hope. In the years that followed, her foundation flourished, helping hundreds of children find their voice through sign language, education, and mentorship. Clara herself became a symbol of empowerment, showing that courage, resilience, and the determination to be seen could overcome the deepest silences. And every time she looked at Amara, she remembered that first evening at the gala, the quiet corner where someone had chosen to see her, and she knew that true change always begins with recognition, empathy, and the willingness to listen.